Hi guys, this is Lucky Luke for Poker VIP. This is my first video. You might have seen some of my articles which have already gone up on site. Very happy to be involved with the site starting this month in February. I'm going to go through hand history today for you of the Hot 75, the Hotter 75, which I managed to get first in a couple of Sundays ago for my personal best. It's my second five-figure score. I have had some very close runs to the six-figure scores, but have yet to get one of those. I've got my personal best in the big Sunday majors is 13th in the Sunday warm-up a couple of months ago now. Just a quick bit about myself. I'm English, as you might be able to hear from my accent. I'm a poker writer and coach, and obviously, making videos and so forth, as well as grinding. Very fortunate to be in a great stable. That's a small stable of mid to high stakes grinders, backed by a very good guy, a very good German pro, who is also coaching us and taking us through the ranks. So for my first video, I'm going to keep things really simple. I'm just going to go through this review of the Hot 75. I've got the Poker Tracker 4 up here. Now don't concern yourselves too much with my HUD. I do need to update this actually. I've had the same HUD for a very long time and I stuffed it full of data that I don't really need and since have learned to refer to in my pop-up mostly. Anyway, so I'll let you know when a statistic is particularly relevant, but the ones that you might want to keep half an eye on are these two at the top. We've got VPIP and P-flop raise. So how often do they put money in the pot, which is how often are they in a pot essentially, apart from when they are just limping in as the big blind without putting any money in, and how often do they actually raise pre-flop. So the difference between those two, as most of you hopefully will know, is signifies their degree of passivity. Okay, so yes, we also have a 3-bet statistic down in the bottom left, and those are the ones you might want to keep half an eye on. So let's kick it off just quickly with the first hand. So we reg at the start of play, and we get dealt the ace-6 suited, and we just let it go when we find ourselves facing a call and a raise from the small blind. I just think this is pretty standard. I don't think there's any reason to call here. There may be multi-way pot. It may be that this guy even raises us. We just don't know, and there's just no need to speculate with this kind of hand this early on when we're facing a hefty raise. Okay. So we're just going to look at every fold as well, because I think I have had a quick glance at this, and I do think that I actually played a bit on the nitty side in this tournament, especially in the later stages. So I do want to kind of take myself to task for that, as it were. This is another spot where, if you were getting fancy play syndrome, you might actually, try to get involved and say, okay, I'm going to do a cold 4-bet because these guys are both in late position. And, this kind of thinking is usually misguided at this stage of the tournament. I mean, I'm not saying that there's no place for it at all, but I just think yeah, I mean, in the smaller stakes games, fancy play syndrome is almost always best avoided. In these kind of stakes games, there are a lot of very good players, and we can think outside the box justifiably a lot more. But I just think, again, early stages, a hand that we're basically turning a blocker hand into a bluff in that we have an ace, so there are fewer aces our opponents to have, so we block aces. But it's an offsuit weak kicker ace. We'd certainly be doing it as basically a bluff if we were to do any kind of raise here. So again, just a good solid fold, I think. So we'll just skip through some of these hands where we obviously don't get involved. So here is the misclick of the tournament. I believe this was actually a disconnection misclick. I did get disconnected for a minute or two in my Sunday grind. I think that was one of the consequences of that, because I don't remember getting annoyed about misclick folding it in game, which I certainly would have done, even in the early stages. So let's just skip through some of these raggy hands that we get out of the way of. Okay, so here's a hand that's worth calling. We are getting almost 6-1 on our money. Certainly good enough with the King 7 suited to come along for that. And we hit something that's basically just very remote backdoors. Somebody bets more than half the pot, so we get out of the way. Very standard. Obviously not going to get involved in this one. Now here, yeah, okay, so we decide not to steal with this hand. I think a steal is fine here actually, unless your opponents have shown sign they're going to call too often. But you know, it's such a weak hand that there's nothing wrong with just folding it away. There are people who will steal basically only 2 cards here if the opponents have been, you know, not playing back very much. Here I think I prefer an open sizing of 2.5x. I would usually make it 2.5x once I'm down to about 60 big blinds. And we'll go into the reasons behind that later, but it's partly to do with building pots, it's partly to do with charging effectively, and it's also just to do with what functions to dissuade opponents to call at different stages of the game. You're just going to get so many calls if you're min raising when you're still 50 effective, say. Okay, so we do get a call, and we just continue. There's no point in slow playing on this kind of textured board where you need to charge the draws, and you may lose action when the spade comes out, for example. If they don't have a drawing hand, that makes it with the draw card, then they may get scared off by it. So you like to get your action here anyway. It's a pretty standard hand. Okay. Now we pick up ace queen and we decide to limp along, to just flat call rather. So this guy, we don't have any hands on him, we've really got 15 hands, so we're going to basically disregard any stats on him, but we're still too deep really to do anything other than flat here. I mean, some people might even argue for a fold, but I think that's a little too radical. So yeah, I mean, we can't really 3-bet. If we 3-bet here, we're turning our hand into a bluff. Now, I suppose we could make an argument that if this guy is tight enough that, I mean, we don't have this information, so we can't in this particular case. But if he was super tight, then it wouldn't really matter if we turn our hand into a bluff, because he's never going to 4-bet us without the goods. But basically, our hand is just way too strong to do that in general. So we want to just come along and see a flop in position. So that's what happens. He checks. I imagine we're going to check behind. Yeah, so we're checking behind because we feel we're going to have the best hand a lot. He's going to bluff with worse hands on the turn a lot when we check behind on the flop. When we do bet here, he's going to fold almost all his worse hands and call almost all his better hands. We might get some very bad pocket pairs to fold, but not many of them. So I just prefer a check here. And he does make, as we hope it is, a bluff on the turn, so we can call because we think we're still ahead plenty of the time. I'm not sure if we're going to call 2 barrels, but he does give it up. Tables the 9-10 suited, so we get some value. Okay, so moving on to some more of these. We'll probably end up dividing this into 2 sections, I would imagine, this review. Because since it is a turbo, it shouldn't take too long to go through it all. And of course, as stacks get shorter, we're going to be looking a lot at shoving ranges, re-shoving ranges and stuff like that. Okay, now let's just pause it here for a second. We again decide not to open something which I think is a kind of a marginal open. I think it's actually fine open. I would probably have drawn the line in game at Queen 9 suited. And just to give you an idea, I suppose it's good to give you an idea of what my ranges would be here. I mean, it depends always on the players behind, stacks behind, the table dynamic and things like this. But with these guys behind, I mean, let's just do a quick view of it. This guy's an unknown with a big stack. This guy is a passive player with over 50 hand sample with a kind of medium stack. This guy over here is a tag player, a little bit more passive, short stack, so we are going to open less because he's going to shove a bit wider, but we're pre-ante, so I don't think he's going to shove that wide. And this guy's not involved. The fact that this chap has one blind means that this should be an open. Yeah, this I had overlooked. So obviously I overlooked this in game as well. So I think that therefore makes it an easy open. But let's just imagine for a second, just for the sake of the example what I was going to use this for. Say that he has 3,000 chips like this other guy, and he's also kind of tight. My opening range here would tend to be something like all pairs, suited aces, all suited aces, and unsuited aces down to about ace-9 off. I certainly, oh, and of course, as regards Broadway cards, then we'd have, all Broadways, suited connectors down to maybe down to 5-4 suited. This is provided I don't think the short is shoving much. I don't think he is pre-antis with his statistics. Unsuited connectors down to probably down to 10-9 off, and probably a few gappers would be in there as well, and we'd probably have things like 10-7 suited and so forth. So you get the picture. So yeah, I'd probably go with the queen suited. I'd probably go down to about queen 9 suited. Those are not religious. That's a ballpark for how I would happen to play this spot, but certainly people who go a bit wider than that. I think I'm still a little on the conservative side when it comes to some of those opening ranges. Okay, and of course remember that this is always relevant to stack sizes. Okay, now here I think. Given I'm one seat around and that we're missing a player, I believe. Oh no, that's just the replay that has 10 seats. So yes, I think this is fine for a fold. I would open ace jack off. I would open ace 9 suited, and I would open ace 9 off if we were just one seat further round. That said, again, the fact that this chap here, Holy Hell, is still going with his 2 blinds means that actually, again, technically, this just falls into the right category because he's effectively not there. So in which case I would open this, yeah. Okay, so we're opening the king queen off under the gun, so it'd certainly be the bottom of my opening range. We are still, yeah, we're basically effectively 8-handed. Game plan is just to fold to any action other than Holy Hell. We're not going to get silly. We should be viewed as very tight considering we're under the gun, and we've been very snug so far. So Holy Hell does get it in, and let's see who wins the small pot. And he rivered us for a small pot there. Just flick back to that. Yeah, he rivers us for a small pot with his king 9 off. Okay, so moving on. Certainly not going to be involved in that spot. And we see, yeah, we do decide to speculate a little bit here in the small blind. Don't think there's anything wrong with folding here, really. We're out of position. You want to feel pretty confident that you can play your hand well out of position to bother with this. It is a pretty hand, and we do expect the big blind to come along a lot when there are already 3 people there. He doesn't look kind of hugely active. He could be capable of a shove here if he has a hand, so that could be a counter argument as well. I don't think it's dreadful to join in here. We're getting again almost 6-1. Certainly would be a lot happier on the button. Okay, so we pick up a pair. Obviously we don't really feel we're going to have the best hand often enough to do anything other than check fold here though, unless someone makes a very small bet. If Ape made a tiny bet I might be tempted. So checks around fairly miraculously twice, and we do hit some value on the end. We do think we can get value because it's just been so quiet. I mean, even though our position makes it look like we probably have something, we might get some thin value here. So we do make the bet, and we do get the thin value from second pair. Okay. Now, I think with this one, yeah, I mean, I really prefer a 3-bet here. I think fold is okay too, and I don't necessarily hate this play if we think that Squire is just nitty and is never shoving and so forth. It's, you know, we're kind of deep enough versus the opener to do something like this. But I think given that this hand is, you know, towards the lower end of the suited connectors, it's a relatively weak suited connector, but it still has some flop value. I think I quite like a 3-bet in planning to fold to any 4-bet or 4-bet shove or what have you, 3-bet fold in this spot, because, you know, we have position, so it's going to be kind of difficult for him to flat us. When he does flat us anyway, we have some flop value, and we're going to get a lot of folds. If there's a history there, it makes it difficult because he's going to come back over the top a lot, and he does have relatively active stats over a tiny sample. So, you know, I don't necessarily hate a flat here, but I'm certainly in two minds. Okay, and the big blind comes along and we totally miss, and he continues and we give up, which is all standard. Okay, so moving on. We pick up the jacks, still opening 2.5, which again is actually a mistake at this point. I think this should definitely be a 2x open, and I assume in game this is one of the things where I've got a lot of tables up, I make this sizing incorrectly and I get annoyed about it immediately, briefly, and then move on. So the reason I 2x here is simply that Squire and P the Legend both have 20 big blind stacks, so they are much more likely to come back over the top with worse, to shove with worse when I make a 2x, because 2.5x for 20 big blind effective spots, it looks scary. We do get a call from P the Legend, which is nice. We hit a flush draw, which is fine. Always nice to pick up a bit of that kind of equity. We continue and he gives it up. Okay. Oop, just skipped overhand there. Let's just cycle back for that one. And we do decide to fold. I think that's fine. I don't think this is a hand I'm often dealing with from this position. And the same goes for this offsuit connector. Okay. So pick up Queen 10 suited in the big blind, and we get a walk from two players come along. We hit the flush, and we decide to lead out, and I think this is fine given that it's a limped pot. If Jurix had actually opened, I would allow the natural flow of the game to continue usually here, I think, and get him to bet with his whole range and call, because I do pretty well versus his whole range, which includes a lot of air. Got overcards and my flush draw there. I wouldn't be trying to stack off here. I think we're too deep, and there's, you know, it's got those pair of sixes out there, so I'm not as keen to stack off on paired boards as I would be otherwise. Okay. So we bet, they both come along. I imagine we're going to slow it down here since they're both there. Now I would probably make a turn barrel if I was only facing one call on the flop, but I think it's too ambitious to try to shake them both off, especially on this turn, which is super unscary. And then we hit one of our cards, which is nice, so we can bet for value. Just going kind of standard half pot for value, I think that's fine there. Okay, getting out of the way with a raggy hand in the small blind seems advisable, and just looking for some nice spots. This isn't one of them. That 3x under the gun from a passive player looks monstrous, and yeah, certainly no good spots there. So opening the pocket eights, and I assume I'm making the same sizing error. Yeah, I mean, usually if I'm paying enough attention, and there are 2 or 3 stacks of anywhere under 20 big blinds, I would not at 2.5x. So I'm a bit annoyed to see this, a bit annoyed myself to see this. It's again a multi-tabling error, which is probably my most common type, and yeah, you're just going to get less action like this, and it's too strong a hand to want to do that. You might do that with certain range of hands. You might find a nice argument if you're against some fairly nitty players or fairly straightforward players to do that with some certain hands. But maybe with king queen off or something, but certainly not with a hand as strong as pocket eights. Okay, this is kind of close. I mean, if I didn't have any reads on him, it might be. If it was 10 instead of, you know, if he was doing this from the small blind with 10 readless, I think it's a call. Now, we can run some maths on that. Actually, that might be a good thing to do here. But given that he's betting from the button, 12, almost 13 blinds effective. Yes, we have antes now, but nonetheless, he's got tight stats. He's 11-11 over almost 90 hands, which is getting on for a decent small sample. He's attempted to steal 3 out of 11 times, so I'm putting him on hand here. Now, I think we will run some numbers on this one, just to give you an idea of what I'm thinking. So let's do the imaginary scenario where he's in the small blind and he's got 2,000 chips. Okay. Now, I'm not going to build his range from that in an absolute sense. I mean, you can do that, and we'll do that in later classes, where you calculate how much money there is to be won, and you calculate, you estimate his range for yourself. What's a suitable range to be shoving there, what should I be calling him with there, and so forth. And you establish essentially a game theory optimal shoving range, which means, a shoving range which after a series of imagined adjustments where two players adjust perfectly to each other, what would end up being the best shoving range to have in this spot. Now, those aren't real necessarily shoving ranges, so those aren't necessarily the ranges people are actually shoving anyway. And when we consult charts for a quick range to work with in an example, those aren't accurate either. So here is a chart which we'll use as a quick shortcut for discussing this spot. So, but we'll look at the shortcomings in using charts as well. We'll look at the limits in this example too. So let's just imagine then he's in the small blind. We're readless. We don't have stats on him, and he's shoving 10 big blinds into us. Okay, with 12.5% antes. Okay, so this chart, which is a fairly old school one from Jennifer, which I've always liked, for the small blind for 10 big blinds, will give this range, which I believe we can just copy and paste straight out of there. Yeah. Okay, so thank you, Jennifer. So it'll give us this range. Now, Jennifer's charts are set up in such a way that they let me get this right. They assume certain things, of course, as all charts do, and the assumptions these ones are built on are that everybody is calling you perfectly, which is rarely going to be the case, and that everybody is equally stacked. Okay, so in this case, of course, if he has 2,000 chips and we have 5.5, we do have him covered. We are going to call him a little bit wider, and if he's a good player, which we're going to treat most people as assumed as at least competent in this game, because it's a higher stakes $75 turbo, so it's not going to have as many fish. If we assume, then that he's shoving competently, he may tighten up just a bit because of our stack advantage, but nonetheless, from the small blind, we'll work with this range. Okay, so let's just punch this range into PokerStove. I don't believe it'll let us copy and paste it directly now. So I'm going to give him 2s plus. And we're just going to see how Queen 10 suited does against that range. And we're going to give him Jack X plus. So of course all aces. Let's just say what he doesn't have. Should be quicker. Okay, so all suited 9s up to ace 4 suited, 7-3 suited, and 6-3 suited, 5-2 suited, sorry, 6-3 suited, 5-2 suited, and 4-3 suited. Okay, and then the offsuits, we're going to do it down to 6-5 off, 7-5 off, 8-6 off, 9-6 off, 10-5 off, and all the jacks and queens. Okay, so this is the range that Jennifer gives as, you know, this is a good shoving range, an optimal shoving range, when everybody's equally stacked and everybody's calling you perfectly. He's going to make certain assumptions about me. I don't know what those are, but we're going to assume he's making regular assumptions that I'm also a regular in these games. So I'm probably calling him reasonably accurately. So, and I stack him a bit, so he's probably going to tighten up a bit on this range. So let's just take the very bottom of this range off and see how that looks. Okay. Something like this, just the very bottom, something like that. Okay, yeah, let's see how that looks. I mean, you know, it may be that he is going as wide as the 77. Anyway, let's just put Queen 10 suited in against that range. Now, before we evaluate it, you know, how much do we need? Well, Poker Tracker kindly tells us that, but again, you can figure that out for yourselves. The money in the middle, again, assuming he's got 2,000, or he's putting in 2,000 on top of his small blind. So, okay, from the small blind. So he's putting in 2,000, and then there's 300 in blinds and 225 in antes. So that is 525 plus 2,000, so 2,525, and we're risking 2,000. Okay, so just give me 1 second. So let me just pull up a calculator here and show you how to run that yourself. So we have to call 2,000, and when we're right, we win 2,525, say something around that amount. So just divide. The quickest way to get the actual percentage you need is just to divide 2,000 divided by the total of those two amounts, which is 4,525. Okay, and that will give you 44%. Okay, well, Poker Tracker is telling us 43, so close enough. Now that's the number, that's the percentage of the time we need to win the hand to break even. That doesn't mean we want 44%, we want more than 44%, in fact. Okay, but in reality, as PokerStove will tell us, we have 54%. Okay, so we've got 10% more than break even here, so that's loads of equity. So we really have to make the call if we think he's on that wider range. However, when he's doing it with 12 blinds, say 13 blinds, closer to, on the button, and he's a tight player, let's just have a quick look at how that we would adjust for that. So just a standard good shoving range against equal stacks against good players would be something around 40%. Okay, so already we can see that the ranges change a great deal between those two spots, just with a difference of 3 blinds. Let me just double check that. Just with a difference, sorry, of 3 blinds, so 39.7, so even slightly bigger difference. 3 big blinds and 1 seat. We've got quite a different range. So let's just punch this in again. I'll clear the old range, and we're going up to all suited kings, all aces of all kinds, King 8 off, Queen 6 suited, Queen 10 off, Jack 7 suited, Jack 7 suited, Jack 9 off, 10-6 suited, 10-9 off, 9-6 suited, 8-6 suited, 7-5 suited, 6-5 suited, 5-4 suited. Okay. So now if we're giving him this range from the button, he's got to get through 2 players, of course, so he does have to be tighter. Now, if we tighten him up even more, actually, because he looks slightly on the nitty side by his statistics, so let's just again take the bottom out of this. Oh, sorry, we left those pairs out. We'll take the bottom out, and yeah, I think that all looks okay. Give him 38%. Now we have 47% equity. It's interesting that we actually, by the look of it, we can still make the call, which I find slightly surprising. Let's Oh yes, of course, that's why Poker Tracker was giving us 43% previously, because it's a different spot. We were considering a spot with 2,000 chips from small blind, weren't we? So yes, my bad. So yeah, that's interesting that it actually looks like we can still call him when he's shoving 13 from the button. That does surprise me. I think, you see, I still have to loosen up my game a little bit. So let's just see how tight we need to go to make that break even, and therefore a mistake, because you don't want to make break even calls when you're putting, especially if you're putting your tourney life in. But even so, the break even means there's no value in making the call. If there's a little bit of value, you may want to make that call. Sometimes you want more than a little bit. Sometimes you want a good few percent of equity to really make a call worthwhile, depending on ICM factors and other things. So stack utility and other arguments. So that is a topic for a whole talk of its own. But let's just take a tiny bit more of the bottom out of this shoving range. Something like that. I do think Queen 9 off should be in there though. Let's just take that out of there. Yeah, and see. Yeah, we can still make the call. Can still make the call. Okay, so that is interesting. So I just want to make a quick comparison with Queen 9 suited, just to show how close or otherwise it is. Queen 9 suited is getting pretty thin. Now Queen 8 suited, yeah, is under the margin. So, but nonetheless, you know, the Queen 10 suited is a healthy. Yeah, I just played around with the range a tiny bit, but it's virtually the same range. So it has a healthy 4%, 3 to 4% equity. So yeah, it's fine to call there in that case. We may, as I think I've mentioned, you know, we may want to adjust that down a bit because we think he's too nitty. And I think in the case of this player, we can make an argument for that because he is only stealing 3 and 11 times. So it doesn't suggest an optimal approach. He may be a bit better with his push fold than his early stage stuff, so that, you know, we don't really know how much we can use that to weight the argument. Nonetheless, an interesting spot to wrap up with. We will be continuing with this in the next installment, hopefully getting as far as the final table and through the final table, I hope. We'll see whether it takes 2 or 3 installments. It really depends how many hands we decide to kind of zoom in on, such as this one, and look at the nitty-gritty and the push-fold maths and stuff like that, calling ranges and so forth. So yeah, I hope that's been of some use to you guys, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thanks a lot.